The officer who was involved in the Daunte Wright shooting has now been charged with second-degree manslaughter. We're going to break this down, including what happened. We're going to go through the charging documents. We're going to take a look at really why she's being charged with this. We're going to look at the statutes, and we're also going to look at a defense. What would a defense be in this situation? Many people are already coming out and saying there is no defense, right? This woman knowingly, accidentally wanted to shoot somebody and shot him and he's dead, and there's no defense for this thing, right? We saw what happened on the body camera. Well, I don't think it's that cut and dry. I think there is actually a lot that you can bring into the conversation about what an appropriate defense would look like, and we're going to get into that. So let's take a look at some background first. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this segment, so I want to flesh this out and frame this out for us before we get into the analysis. So let's take a look at what's going on. According to the New York Post, Kimberly Potter is arrested. She's going to be charged with manslaughter. So she's a former Minnesota police officer, fatally shot Daunte Wright after mistaking her gun for a taser. Agents with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension this morning arrested a former Brooklyn Center police officer for the April 11th shooting of Daunte Wright. Agents took her into custody 11:30 a.m. this morning at St. Paul. They said after consultation with county prosecutors, Potter will be booked at the Hennepin County Jail. Washington County Attorney Peter Orput, who is the prosecutor, who is expected to prosecute the case locally, said earlier the details of the charges will be released later. She was charged a day after she resigned from Brooklyn Center Police in the wake of the 20-year-old shooting. 26-year veteran and police chief both resigned in the wake of the shooting. City Council also fired Kurt Bogany over the incident. I think this guy, the city manager, said something like, I don't know, people deserve due process. So obviously he had to go. Washington County was tapped to decide on charging instead of Hennepin County because they wanted to avoid conflict of interest. Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliott on Tuesday said he would ask Governor Tim Walz to turn the prosecution over to Attorney General Keith Ellison. Well, we already know who Keith Ellison is because he's the guy who's running the Chauvin trial, isn't he? So that's a little bit of background. Let's take a look at what the BCA is saying on Twitter. This is the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. This is Department of Public Safety. They say agents with the BCA arrested officer in the shooting death of Daunte Wright. Kim Potter went into custody 11:30. She's going to be booked into Hennepin County Jail on probable cause second-degree manslaughter. We're going to look at that statute more in depth here shortly. The Washington County Attorney's Office will file charges later today. This remains an active and ongoing investigation. We're going to continue to work with the Washington County Attorney's Office. Brooklyn Center Mayor takes on oversight of the police and fires the city manager. So we're just seeing heads roll across the board in Minnesota. They were poised to fire the city's police chief on Monday following the shooting of a 20-year-old black man on Sunday. An emergency afternoon meeting, City Council voted to give authority over the police department to the mayor's office and to fire city manager Kurt Bogany. He'd been with the city since 2005, said city council member. At the virtual council workshop, Councilmember Chris Lawrence Anderson said she voted to remove the city manager because she feared for her property and retaliation by protesters if she had voted to keep him. So we have a city council member who goes by the name of Chris Lawrence Anderson, who says that she voted to remove somebody, to fire somebody from their job who had been there since 2005 because she was afraid of her property being torched and her retaliation being exacted upon her. She said, he was doing a great job. I respect him dearly. I didn't want repercussions at a personal level. Holy moly. Wait, what? In Minnesota this is happening? So we have a city council member who is now fearing retribution from the mob. And we have a trial that's taking place right around the corner in Derek Chauvin, where jurors, if they vote one particular way, may also receive repercussion from the mob. So that's just great. We have the National Guard activated 500 personnel as of Monday morning to keep the peace, and plans to increase that number are coming in coming days. They want to burn the place down, said New. New said as he stood across the police station, I'm sick of it. This has to spark change. Some Guard members blocked the entrance to the Shingle Creek Crossing Shopping Plaza, where social media posts showed looters ransacking stores, carrying off everything from printers to clothing. Some stores in that plaza also had faced damage in late May, which was after Floyd's killing. We've got New York clothing manager said the only item left appeared to be a pair of jeans on a mannequin. I understand why people are frustrated. He said, I really do. At Walmart, flip-flops and bottles of fruity drinks littered the parking lot, where a man who gave his name as Thomas was part of a small army of store employees picking up trash and debris. All of our large screen TVs were taken. Netflix for justice. Get your big screen TVs, go home and fire up some streaming TV in the name of American justice and equality. All right. We have a night of rage. Duante Wright rioters burned down police building and forced cop Kimberly Potter to flee her home after her address is leaked. So this is a bad situation that's getting dramatically worse by the minute, by the day. More than 60 people were arrested in Portland, Minneapolis, New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago amid growing unrest throughout the country after a 25-year veteran by the name of Kim Potter shot and killed Wright during a traffic stop on Sunday. They descended onto the home of Kim Potter, who shot Wright after allegedly mistaking her gun for a taser. 25-year veteran. Her home was barricaded up on Tuesday night as crowds gathered outside her 5-bedroom house. Potter and her husband, a former Fridley police officer, fled the residence after the address was shared on social media. Riot was declared in Portland for a second consecutive night after the police union headquarters in North Portland was swarmed by around 100 people and set on fire. Smoke engulfed the street as the flames erupted. Next to the letters ACAB, which means all cops are bees. Scores of protesters in Brooklyn Center last night lobbed bottles and other projectiles over a fence in front of police headquarters as chaos erupted outside the police station. So not looking good, right? And we have a woman who is in the thick of it right now, being basically driven from her home. City sounds like it's in total disarray. 60 people arrested all across the country. Protests all over the place. It's not good. Not good. And Let's continue on. Oh my gosh. So demonstrators used umbrellas, the tops of storage units, and boogie boards as makeshift shields to protect against cops to deflect tear gas, flash bombs, and other non-lethal weapons, which sounds a lot worse than anything that we saw at the Capitol building. Am I wrong about this? We saw some of that, right? But shields, but these people are arming up for war. Like, they're arming up. Shields, like shields. Were there Capitol Hill people with shields, flash bombs, and other non-lethal weapons? Like, these people are arming up for a battle. Police declared an unlawful assembly at the drastically reinforced Brooklyn Center police station as riot cops and the National Guard shielded the building, which is now enclosed by concrete barriers and metal fencing. Murderopolis was spray painted on one of the barriers, just a stone's throw from where Floyd was killed last May. It came after protesters gathered peacefully yesterday afternoon before marching to the FBI headquarters. About 90 minutes before a 10 p.m. curfew, state police announced over a loudspeaker the gathering had been declared unlawful, ordered to leave immediately. You are hereby ordered to disperse, read the loudspeakers. Curfew was in effect until 6 a.m. Wednesday, so early this morning. Announcement set off confrontations with protesters launching fireworks toward the station and throwing objects at police. So literally launching projectiles at government buildings. Minnesota made more than 60 arrests for rioting and other offenses during last night's protest. Despite the explosive protest, still and somber vigils were also held across the nation to remember what happened to Daunte Wright. So let's take a look at some of the aftermath. So here's a nice image. We have ACAB. This was where some flashbangs were going off. This is over from the sun.com. So that looks, not good. Independent media from the U.S. Sun. We also have, oh, here it is.
Hey guys, can you please step back? We're gonna have some fire folks coming in. Thank you. If you guys can stay back on that sidewalk, let's secure the sidewalk line. Let's get the cars out on Lombard.
All right, so, not a good situation. I wonder if the FBI is going to be posting on Twitter every day looking for all of the people who are involved in all this stuff, because they're still working on that for the Capitol Hill people, but I wonder if they're going to take that same vigor and tenacity and go after all of these people. Somehow, I doubt it, but let's carry on. We have another image of fencing and barriers surrounding the home of Kimberly Potter, and so that's their house. You got the police boarded up, concrete barriers, no parking at any time. They're sort of just securing her residence, as they should, right? Look, this is America. We still have the presumption of innocence in this country. We still have due process for the time being. Don't know how much longer we're going to have any of that stuff. But, and I'm not being hyperbolic about that. I'm like genuinely concerned about this. But this is now a judgment of guilt, right? I mean, this woman has not even she had her day in court today. She's already been thrown out of her house. We have protesters throw flashbangs at police as law enforcement smoked people to disperse. So you see them coming, pretty suited up. You've got some serious COVID masks, if they want to claim that's what those are. These look like tear gas masks, right? It's to prevent people. These people are suited up. They have battle gear on in a way that we have not seen other protests. We have the National Guard stepped up to patrol during the third night of protest in Minnesota. So we got some troubling imagery. Other projectiles include a traffic cone. So, that's not that dangerous. But there was another officer who was saying that there was, in fact, frozen cans of pop, he called them, I think. It was just how you know you're in the Midwest. And so now let's take a look at what Miss Potter, Officer Potter, is being charged with. Here is the statute, and this may look familiar to you because we've already covered this in the Chauvin trial. 2020 Minnesota statutes, manslaughter in the second degree. We know that this is what she's being charged with, and here is what it says, 609.205. A person who causes the death of another by any of the following means is guilty of manslaughter. May be sentenced to prison for not more than 10 years, fine of $20,000 or both. So before we go through this, right, we have to understand what she's being charged with before we can build a proper defense for her. So let's take a look at how this statute works. And we went through this a couple days ago. We looked at the murder charges, manslaughters, all of them. And this was the one that I thought fit most, mainly because of this one right here. Number one, by the person's culpable negligence, whereby the person creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances of causing death or great bodily harm to another, right? That's the one that fits, subsection 1. Number 2, shooting another with a firearm, no. Spring gun, no. Negligently permitting an animal, no. None of those stuff. Okay, down here we have, if proven by a preponderance of the evidence, it shall be affirmative defense that provoked an animal. So that doesn't apply either. So we're only worried about basically this right here, manslaughter in the second degree. Now let's break down this statute a little bit because we see this one in the Chauvin case. And in the Chauvin case, we've been really bickering about this word here, causing death, right, in Chauvin. What was the ultimate cause of death? We're also arguing about culpable negligence, right? Cause of death is being dealt with the drugs killing Floyd, heart disease killing Floyd, or was it the knee on the neck that killed Floyd? What was the cause? And that's in the statute, right? The causing death. It's got to be in there. Somebody has to die, and somebody needs to be the cause of death. Consciously takes chances of causing death, does something reckless, does something that creates an unreasonable risk. And that's what we're using in the Chauvin case, or what the defense is using in the Chauvin case, to sort of say that he didn't cause the death. And on top of that, he wasn't negligent either. This is where all the use of force conversation comes into play. So he wasn't negligent, right? This was a legitimate use of force. He was allowed to put his knee on the back. Prone position's not even dangerous. Other use of force experts like Officer Brode, who came in yesterday, they were testifying that this is perfectly reasonable. An objectively reasonable officer would have done that itself, right? So on the Chauvin case, you're seeing Nelson frame this out for these two concepts, culpable negligence and causing death. Well, in this case, now we're talking about Kim Potter, so we got to change gears a little bit. Do we have a question about causation? Is there any doubt in anybody's mind about what caused Daunte Wright's death? No, right? Not at all. You could do an autopsy of him. You could say he had heart disease, he had cancer, he had whatever you want. But none of those things killed him. What did? The bullet. Pretty clear. Different than Chauvin, right? We got a lot of different causal factors that could all be sort of intertwined together on that case. So, not going to be able to defend her on causation. She killed him. No question. It was homicide. Gun fired, bullet left the gun, went into his body, he's dead. Obvious. So we can't even talk about this, about causing death. So now what do? Well, here's what you do. You say, this wasn't culpable negligence. This wasn't negligence. What Kim Potter did, the argument is going to go, wasn't negligence. How does that work? Because we all heard her say she thought she was tasing him. Taser, 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 boom. Oh, shoot, I just shot him. So what do we have to do? We have to show that this wasn't, in fact, culpable negligence. And is there a way to do that? We have to take out the entire conversation about the mistake. We have to take out the entire conversation about whether or not she was using a taser or a gun. None of that matters for her defense. Her defense here is that she had full legal authority to shoot and kill him. She was allowed to do that. It wasn't negligence. She could have shot and killed him. She didn't intend to, but she could have. And if she would have, that would not be a crime, right? That's what the defense has to be. It's that an objectively reasonable officer in that position could have shot Duante Wright, and that would not have been a crime. Okay, that's the defense. And I know that sounds tricky. It's not. Let's take a look. First thing we want to do is look at the Graham versus Connor factors. If you've been following the Chauvin trial, you know they talked a lot about this in Chauvin, a lot about this. They're battling over this several different days during testimony. Let's take a look at this case and see how it applies to Kim Potter. So first and foremost, I want to invite you to go over to thoughtco.com. Found a very nice summation of the Graham versus Connor case. And so we're going to be jipping from them a little bit. Here is a link to this. This was drafted by Eliana Spitzer, updated on January 16th, 2021. Did a very nice job assembling all of this. So Graham versus Connor, the case and its impact. This was a Supreme Court ruling on how to assess excessive force by police, right? And for Kim Potter, yeah, it's clearly excessive force, right? That's the argument. She's being charged with manslaughter. She shot and killed somebody, should not have shot and killed somebody. It's excessive force. This case is on point. So what's going on with Graham versus Connor? Here is what happened. It was decided back on 1989. Very important case. It's all about excessive force. The key question, did Graham have to show that police acted maliciously and sadistically for the very purpose of causing harm to establish that they used excessive force? So there was an old standard, right? Maliciously and sadistically. And they were saying that this was basically cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment. So there was some case law that said, yeah, in order to show that an officer was acting with excessive force, you got to show that they were acting maliciously and sadistically. And so they said, well, look, in this situation, are we really still applying that standard? Because that sounds kind of antiquated. So that standard sounds bad. Also, what is the appropriate constitutional authority for this? 4th, 8th, or 14th Amendment. So we have the Supreme Court comes out and says that excessive use of force claims they must be evaluated under a new standard, not the standard maliciously and sadistically anymore. Now they're going to say it's objectively reasonable, which requires courts to consider the facts and the circumstances surrounding an officer's use of force rather than the intent or motivation of an officer during that use of force. So can you see it? Can you see where this is coming up? One more time. If we're going to be using the objectively reasonable standard of the Fourth Amendment, it says that courts consider the facts and circumstances surrounding an officer's use of force rather than the intent or the motivation of an officer during that use of force. In other words, it's not about what she thought or did right then and there that we measure use of force against, her subjective belief. Not relevant. Supreme Court has said it's the objective interpretation. It's whether an officer, an objectively reasonable officer, had the lawful authority to use deadly force right then and there. Okay, she was not intending to do that. Her personal perspective was on this, I didn't want to shoot him. I was going to use my taser. It was an accident that I shot him. But she could have shot him, is the argument. She could have. She chose not to or tried not to, ended up doing it. It was a mistake, but the mistake's irrelevant because she could have lawfully, legally, and without criminality shot him right then and there. That has to be the defense. So how does this play out then? How does this work? Let's take a closer look at Graham versus Connor. And remember, we're talking about an objective standard. So if you were to sort of take the mistake out of this, take the gun out of it, take any of her actions, any of her statements saying taser, 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 Oh shoot, I shot any of that stuff. Take all of that out. Let's rewind the clock. If she were standing there and they're conducting an arrest and he takes off, Daunte Wright, and she pulls out a gun and shoots him, intending to do that, would that be murder? Would that be excessive force? That's the real issue. So let's ask ourselves that. And let's go back to the majority opinion once again from Eliana Spitzer. This was a unanimous decision delivered by Justice Rehnquist. The court found that excessive use of force claims against police officers should be analyzed under the Fourth Amendment. They wrote, the analysis should take into account the reasonableness of the search and seizure. To determine if an officer used excessive force, they must decide how an objectively reasonable a police officer in the same situation would have acted. The officer's intent or motivation should be irrelevant in the analysis. So what the officer intended to do or what their motivation was is irrelevant in the analysis. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. All you got to do is show that a reasonable officer, an objectively reasonable officer in the same situation could have shot Daunte Wright. This particular officer's intent or motivation doesn't matter. In the majority opinion, Justice Rehnquist, the Chief Justice, wrote, an officer's evil intentions will not make a Fourth Amendment violation out of an objectively reasonable use of force, nor will an officer's good intentions make an objectively unreasonable use of force constitutional. So intentions don't matter. Has nothing to do with it. The court struck down previous lower court rulings, which used the Johnson versus Glick test under the 14th Amendment. That was a different test, so it required good faith or malicious sadistic intent under the 8th Amendment. All of that got thrown out under this new opinion. The court reiterated the previous findings, another very important case, in Tennessee versus Garner, to highlight jurisprudence on the matter. In that case, the Supreme Court had similarly applied the Fourth Amendment to determine whether the police should have used deadly force against a fleeing suspect if that suspect appeared unarmed. Okay, so this case is on point. We're going to look at this one. Tennessee versus Garner. Fourth Amendment standard, whether the police should have used deadly force against a fleeing suspect like Daunte if that suspect appeared unarmed, right? Almost sounds exactly like what happened in Daunte's case. In that case, as well as Graham versus Connor, the court decided that they must consider the following factors to determine whether the force was excessive, right? This is the legal standard. Was it excessive? We have to ask ourselves these questions. We're talking about the severity of the crime at issue in this Daunte case, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of officers or others, safety of the officers or others, and whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. We got three factors that we need to consider here. Here's what they are. Severity of the crime at issue. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about an immediate threat to the officers or others. We're going to talk about actively resisting arrest. So let's get into it. Before we do, we saw that other case, right? Tennessee versus Garner. Let's take a look at that one. Here we see Tennessee versus Garner is a civil case in the U.S. Supreme Court. You can see that by U.S. here. Under the Fourth Amendment, when a law enforcement officer is pursuing a fleeing suspect, the officer may not use deadly force to prevent escape unless the officer has probable cause to believe the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others, right? What would that be in the Daunte case? Well, it would be him fleeing in a car, creating a police chase, running on down the road, right? Easily could result in another person being seriously injured. Police chases all the time end in crashes and death. And girlfriend was in the car too. We're not just talking about other passerbys, right? Other drivers. We're talking about the potential girlfriend getting injured because he is driving her. So right now, you see under the Tennessee versus Garner standard, reasonable force can include, it's reasonable to use deadly force if somebody's fleeing, as long as you have probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death. So they can easily say that about Daunte Wright. His girlfriend was in the car, could have hit any number of other motorists around the vehicle. So you can use deadly force. It was found that the use of deadly force to prevent escape is unreasonable seizure under the Fourth Amendment in the absence of probable cause that the fleeing suspect posed a physical danger. So if there's probable cause there's enough there that this person could have posed a physical danger, then you can use force. You can actually shoot and kill somebody for that under that standard. So we have to do some analysis here, don't we? Let's go and do it. Who is Duante Wright, 20-year-old black man killed in an officer-involved shooting? Authorities said that he was pulled over for having expired registration. All right, so let's ask ourselves the first question, the first prong of the question, the seriousness of the crime at hand. Well, if you stop right there, expired registration, not that serious. And I made this point repeatedly on this channel that I don't think that we should be conducting high stakes, high risk arrests on the middle of the road where there's traffic, speeding by. There are other places, other ways that we can do that. That's aside the point, that's a tangent. But here, expired registration doesn't sound like that serious of an offense, right? But you have to consider it from the officer's perspective. We're talking about a defense of Kim Potter. We're going to make arguments in the light most favorable to her and her defense. So we got to give her the benefit of the doubt. They went and saw that the initial stop was done by expired registration. Then they determined he had an outstanding warrant. So now we're talking about expanding the registration crime into something bigger, like an outstanding warrant. Police said they tried to arrest him. He re-entered the vehicle. An officer fired, striking him, traveled several blocks before striking another vehicle. Court records show that he has a criminal record after failing to appear in court on charges that he fled from officers and possessed a gun without a permit during an encounter with Minneapolis in June. In that case, a statement of probable cause said police got a call about a man waving a gun who was later identified as Wright. So now you have the severity of the crime, right? The severity of the underlying crime that we are guided by Connor versus Graham versus Connor gives us one of our first factors about excessive force. Registration, yeah, not very severe. So you would say the relationship there is inverse, right? If it's I would say they're correlated, right? If you have a very severe crime that's taking place, you can use a very high level of force. If you have a very insignificant crime happening, you got to use a very low level of force. So here, registration, low crime, low level of force, right? Unless the cops went back, ran his plates, figured out who this guy was, said he's got outstanding warrants, he fled from officers previously, and he possessed a gun without a permit previously, and we got a call previously about him waving a gun around, okay? That elevates the stakes a little bit. And so remember, we're forgetting about the mistake. We're forgetting about the taser versus the gun. All of that we're setting that aside for now. The question is, under these facts, could an officer reasonably use a higher level of force based on the fact that he's got prior gun charges? Maybe. Let's carry on. We have next, Wright's father, Aubrey, told the Washington Post that his son had just asked his mom for $50 for a car wash and was headed there when he was shot. I know my son, he's scared. Still had the mind of a 17-year-old because we babied him. If he was resisting an arrest, you could tase him. I don't understand it. Aubrey said Duante had a 2-year-old son dropped out of high school 2 years ago because of a learning disability. Duante has since worked in retail and fast food restaurants to support his son and planned to get his GED. Aubrey told the Post. And so this is something that I wanted to mention. I wanted to pause on this. Nadar actually brought this up earlier in a different segment on this show, but this is where you have to just remember that we're dealing with people here, right? We can get very mechanical about this, and I can be guilty of that myself. I can be somebody who looks at statutes and sort of analyzes the news and gets very granular, cold, mechanical, clinical about the analysis. But we are talking about people here. And this is actually, I think, a real problem where we're seeing so much of this stuff happen on a daily basis. We're doing so much analysis. We're sort of watching these things happen from different perspectives and gamifying it in a way that you can lose touch with this fact, right? Aubrey said Duante had a 2-year-old son. Okay, troubled kid, dropped out of high school, learning disability. I mean, good Lord, like, right? Is this a thug, a hood, whatever, like that caricature of people who are out there, causing mayhem? Or is this a troubled young man, right, who got a learning disability and a 2-year-old? Like, it's a person. You might think that he looks one way or acts a certain way, or you might want to call him a maniac for trying to flee the scene, but it's a person. Maybe it's a learning disability. Maybe there's just something wrong with the guy, right? And you don't want to just automatically say anybody who flees just gets shot. So we got to think about this from terms of incentives too, right? Do we want to give cops the incentive, the ability to just shoot anybody? Well, he was fleeing. Well, he had a gun. I felt danger. I felt like I was in danger of my safety, so I just shot him, right? Like, no. So should Kim Potter be charged with a crime? Yes, absolutely. She was involved in an altercation. Somebody died from what looks like to be her negligence. And when somebody dies, we as a society have to pause and say, this is a big friggin' deal, right? We do not want our society structured in a way where we're just sort of glossing over extensions of the government. The police are extensions of our government, killing citizens. Okay, that's never something that we just go, oh, reasonable. Oh, it's objective reasonableness. And cops should just shoot people and just kind of, oh, it happened again. Hey, Lou, another one. Can you believe this? No, we don't want that. So you want to make sure that there are consequences for killing people. But this is still America. She still deserves the presumption of innocence. She still deserves due process. She still deserves a fair trial. So we want to make sure she gets that without losing humanity in this situation, without just sort of dunking on one side or the other, saying that everything Kim Potter did, everything that she does is angelic and she's a hero of America, or Daunte Wright is a hero of America, and we're gonna fight in his honor, torching police stations or something like that. Like, this is a tragedy, right? We have a dead 20-year-old kid with a 2-year-old son and a grieving family. We have a woman who is a former officer, 25 years. Her life is destroyed. Now she's facing criminal charges. The cities are burning down across the place. It's like, we got to pause and just say, can we be human for a little bit when we're talking about this? We don't need to bundle up our ideologies. Can we just connect as people and analyze this stuff from a humanitarian perspective? Because the volume is getting so high these days, it's becoming problematic in a way that I've never seen it, right? And I'm not that old, so maybe that doesn't mean that much, but this is troubling. We're now seeing how this is spilling over into potentially other trials, like the Chauvin trial. And if we get an overly weaponized, more than it is right now, judicial system where we're seeing political prosecutions because we have angry mobs in this country demanding justice, that is not good for America. We have to hold the line on the presumption of innocence. We have to hold the line on due process against the mob. So we're going to continue to do that. We're going to try to do it with humanity and compassion. We're going to stick to our guns. Everybody deserves a defense and that presumption. And so we're going to carry on. Court records indicate Daunte has had some previous brushes with the law. He was arrested in February on a charge of aggravated robbery, but later was released from custody. Aggravated robbery, we're going to look at that statute. February 2020, Daunte was also convicted of a misdemeanor for disorderly conduct in connection with an event to the prior summer. He pled guilty in 2019 to a petty misdemeanor for marijuana, which not a big deal. Now, aggravated robbery, right? That's a big deal. So let's take a look at this court record. Here are the charge details. We've got this happened, it looks like booking number back of 2021, released from custody, received February 11, 2021, conditional release. So he was released. Aggravated robbery is the description of the charge down here, right? From Minneapolis PD, reason for arrest, probable cause. Looks like a $0 bail, so they let him out. So aggravated robbery, right? Typically, when something is aggravated, that means that there's a weapon involved. That's why it becomes aggravated. What happens if you just break into somebody's house and rob them? That's regular robbery. If you use a knife or a gun, or you fake using a knife or a gun, hey, let me in or I'm going to shoot you. You don't have a gun. You're sort of make-believing. That's aggravated because it involves a crime. And that is the same situation in Minnesota. Here is the statute for aggravated robbery. Whoever, while committing a robbery, is armed with a dangerous weapon or any article used or fashioned in a manner that led the victim to reasonably believe it was a dangerous weapon is guilty of aggravated robbery in the first degree, right? So it could be first degree or second degree. I don't know. We can't tell from this charge. This description down here says aggravated robbery. But here it says, while committing a robbery implies that we have a dangerous weapon. So it's a serious charge, right? It's a weapons charge. And he had a warrant out for another case. I don't know specifically which case it was, but here is from Minnesota court records online. We saw that there was a notice of remote hearing with instructions, e-filed a summons, and then a warrant was issued back on March 2nd. So it could have been the same case, because if it was filed February 11th, you have an initial court date. We'll say, yeah, right about that, right about 30 days out. He didn't show up to that, so they sent out another summons. Then they set a new court date probably on 4/2, about a month after March, and that went away. He didn't show up for that court date, so they issued a warrant. Then on 4/13, he's dead, so the prosecution dismisses the case, and you can see that go away, right? He's deceased. There's no further case. So he's got an aggravated robbery, other criminal charges floating around. Here is a notice of a Zoom hearing from one of his cases on April 2nd. So he was supposed to appear in court probably on this date. Yeah, right there, April 2nd. So he was supposed to appear in court for his first appearance, didn't show up. Here are the charges on that case. Pistol without a permit in a public place. It's a gross misdemeanor. We also have fleeing a peace officer by means other than a motor vehicle. So already had tried to run from cops. This happened back on June 30th, 1600 hours. Several officers responded to a person with a gun call near Minneapolis, Hennepin County. Caller indicated that a light complex 17-year-old black male wearing a black shirt, shorts, and shoes was waving a black handgun. Male then got into a white Toyota Camry occupied by 4 people. Officers located the car nearby with the person's defendant herein. Once out of the vehicle, so they checked him, right? Duante Demetrius Wright, date of birth 10/27/20. Well, that can't be right. 2000. He wasn't born in 2020. Maybe 2000, which would have made him 20, matching a person with the gun's description sitting in the back seat. Once out of the vehicle, defendant took off running with officers in pursuit, managed to evade the officers. At the scene, they positively identified him. They found a loaded Ruger .45 caliber handgun matching the caller's description was found on the floor where the vehicle had been sitting. Another occupant verified it was the defendant's. He does not have the permit to carry a firearm. So he got those charges, got summons to appear on, looks like, what was that? April 2nd, didn't show up, so a warrant was issued on that day, Duante Wright. Here we have, this was signed off on, looks like by the judge, gross misdemeanor, fleeing a peace officer by other scenes. So, all right, so if the police then stop him, get his ID, they go check his information in the vehicle, in the police vehicle. They find out he's got outstanding warrants from an April 2nd court date he didn't show up for. What is going on with that? They probably have notes in their system, or they should be able to look it up. Don't know if they did. Don't know what they saw. Don't know if, this is all speculation, so I don't know. But realistically, yes, they should have seen it, looked into it. They look into it. It's a gun charge. They look at his criminal record, aggravated robbery, meaning he had other records involving weapons. So a cop now has to factor that into their analysis. And so we go back to the Graham versus Connor questions about excessive force, the severity of the crime at issue. So here we've got several different crimes, presumably that the officer knew about. Kim Potter, I would guess, knew about this stuff, right? She was walking back towards him. I'm going to guess that she went into the car, maybe learned a little bit more about him. So severity of a registration violation, very low, meaning use of force would also be very low. But aggravated robbery, outstanding warrants for gun violations, that increases the severity, which again, an objectively reasonable officer under the Graham versus Connor standards would incorporate that into their response about what level of force to use. Again, setting aside the taser, setting that all aside. Based on the facts, could an officer, using these 3 standards, severity of the crime at issue, justify this prong of the shooting? I think so. We've got aggravated robbery. We've got a number of other charges. We've got a criminal warrant out. So it elevates it, in fact, from a registration violation to something more serious. Next, whether the suspect posed an immediate threat to the officers or to the others. We've already talked about this, but yeah, right. If he got in his car and fled, as he was doing, he was in the process of doing that, he could have killed his girlfriend. He could have killed any other passerby. Presumably, he could have run over one of the cops, right? If they would have sort of engaged with him in a different way, they could have been, brought under the vehicle, run over by the back tire. Happens. So was he an immediate threat? Could you make the argument that he was an immediate threat to the officers and others based on what we saw? Yeah, you could make that argument, right? I just did. And number 3, whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. Not even a question on that one. So severity of the crime, pretty severe. Did he pose an immediate threat to others? Yeah, you can make a very strong argument that he did. Could he, or was there any question about whether he was actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight? No question about that at all. So if you go through those 3 Graham versus Connor factors, there's a defense there. An objectively reasonable officer in that position could have shot Duante Wright and made an argument under the excessive force rules as they exist under the U.S. Supreme Court, under Graham versus Connor and Garner versus Tennessee. Go look those cases up. So if she takes that position, if she says, I didn't intend to shoot him, but I did, and I was justified in doing so given what was happening at the scene, that's a defense. Let's take a look at some questions from locals.com. Go over to our watchingthewatchers.locals.com address, ask a question, and let's get plugged in. We've got Big Dog 111 says, how did they charge Kim Potter so quickly? Was there really time for a thorough investigation? Are they just trying to quiet the riots? Yeah, I think so. I don't have any issues with the quickness of the charge. I think that it's pretty clear what happened here. I did an analysis, I think on Monday, and I went through the statutes, and I'm pretty sure I came to the same conclusion that they did. You know, it was, I think yes, two things are happening. One, they do want to move quickly so that they can quell the riots, but I don't think it's that complicated of a case, really. I mean, we saw what happened on the video. Didn't seem intentional. I think it's the right one that fits, so I'm not really sure that it would require that much time. Aunt Deb says, question for Rob, don't know if covered yet. Why is Officer Potter being treated so severely when the officer who shot Babbitt at Capitol Hill is not even getting a mention? And, you know, it's a good question. And I saw that headline this afternoon, but I was already too deep into show prep to change gears. So we didn't get to talk about Ashley Babbitt today. But I'm curious. I just saw the headline on it. I haven't seen the formal press release or what their explanation is for that, or what the distinction there is, right? Because if you go through the Graham versus Connor factors, the severity of the crime for Ashley Babbitt, yeah, it's pretty high, right? She's in the Capitol building. She's going through the barricades there. So that prong's pretty high. So you would say severity of the crime's high. There are a lot of people who are in the congressional building who we cannot let get harmed, right? Congress people and the vice president at the time. So very severe crime would justify a high use or high level of force. Next, you have the likelihood that that person might injure others or officers. Yeah, on that one, I'm not so sure, right? You know, did she have a weapon? Did the officer see a weapon? That officer may have sort of been possibly injured, not just by Ashley Babbitt, but the bigger threat, I think, is the mob of which Ashley Babbitt's a part of that. So you could make an argument that force was necessary because she was one component of a bigger throng of people that would justify a high level of force. And was she trying to flee? No, right? So that prong is absolutely gone, right? She wasn't trying to flee. She was trying to get in. So the third prong is not there. So maybe that's how they would distinguish it and do the play-by-play analysis, but I have not seen their explanation. That's just off the top of my head. Pinky number 2 says, I saw the video yesterday. Unfortunately, the young man tried to get away and did, but in the commotion, it did look like a big commotion. I believe the officer did shoot instead of take the young man accidentally. I'll be the first to think it was on purpose if it seemed that way. How does the law prosecute for an accident? We have car accidents every day. Cars are deadly. So if it results, you know, if you kill somebody as a result of your negligence, yeah, you're going to be charged with a crime. In vehicles, we typically call that negligent homicide or vehicular manslaughter for like DUI cases and things. There's a separate subsection of crimes that will flesh those out. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it was an accident, but it's still a catastrophic accident. You still get criminal liability even though it was an accident, unfortunately for her. We have Liberty or Death says, remember when Obama said we needed a civilian force just as powerful as the police and National Guard to institute change? Yeah, it's coming up right now. It's coming up. Everybody's seeing it. Liberty or Death sees it. Sharon Quidney says, so now we have a blatant and accepted mob rule and legislatures are calling for abolishing the police. This is part of the plan. Create such chaos that people will accept any kind of dictatorship just to get some kind of life back. Yeah. These are the peaceful protests. Now, if they were wearing MAGA hats, they would be insurrectionists. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I can't even disagree with that. Apparently, they were arrested, so that's not right. That's not entirely fair. There were arrests. We saw, I think, 60 arrests. We're going to see what happens with those, though. We got Liberty or Death says, isn't it funny that the same government officials that want to defund the police are instituting a curfew? Yeah, that is interesting, right? Who's going to enforce the curfew? If there's no police, who's going to enforce the curfew? And hey, if there's no police, who's going to enforce the mask mandates? It's sort of the same demographics. We have No Doubt says standard strategy for Antifa and BLM in Portland and Chicago to carry shields into conflicts with the police. They also wear helmets and gas masks. Yeah, they're arming up for conflict. Is the FBI going to go get them, or what are they doing? A big taser with Taser Popo, a big issue with Taser Popo is that her actions are inexcusable, but there is likely an explanation that helps us understand what happened so we can prevent it in the future. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that there is anything anything more that you can do. I mean, she just grabbed the wrong gun. Apparently it's supposed to be on the other side of her waist. She just grabbed the wrong one. We have Norovirus says, have you seen the comments on Fox News regarding an article saying the Justice Department is not filing any charges in the Ashley Babbitt case? There was a complete and total outrage that if a white person gets murdered, there is no action. I don't want to say white people don't, as it is so politically provocative, but compare charges in Daunte Wright case filed within 3 days to Ashley Babbitt in 4 months. Yeah, there's a clear difference there. I'm going to go take a look at the charging document. There's not going to be a charging document, but there's probably a press release on the Babbitt stuff, so I'll take a look at that. We have Liberty or Death says, pretty neat that we had BLM and Antifa covering their faces, and once there was pushback on not being able to identify them, we are all forced to wear masks. Seems like a great setup. Yeah, I know. I know it. NY Renal MD says, if you read history, there are movements and people that live among us. They don't love this country, but they hate it. They are failures in life generally and want everything to burn down so they can be in charge. They don't care about the Constitution or acting humanely. I still... I don't really understand, I think, a lot of the clamoring for more government oversight. I just don't, I instinctually have a hard time because I'm so viscerally the opposite of that about what we want more government to solve more things. I feel like everywhere we turn, the government is screwing stuff up. I don't know why I want to give them more power. We have Baranski says, are you sure the police officer killed him and not the gun company? Police might not be responsible enough if they are broke. Yeah, no, it's true. It's like they should sue Glock, right? And probably the people who mined the metal out of the ground if you want to take this thing back all the way. Ma Fox says, when you have a gun on one hip and a water gun on the other hip, do you think it's only reasonable to check which you're using before you shoot someone? Just a little peek, 0.5 seconds, not even. Yeah, and I don't know if Kim Potter's gun was a different color, but we saw that yesterday, that the New York Times did a compare and contrast, and you had the black gun, and you have a bright yellow neon taser gun in the other hand. We've got, and so how would you see it, right? If you're going to pull it, my point being is if you're going to pull it out, here's my little clicker. If you're going to pull it out in front of your eyeballs, you're going to see the color. You're either going to see this yellow or you're going to see the black. You're going to know what it is before you actually pull the trigger. So you would think that you'd see it, but maybe not. We have Norovirus says, I'm sorry for this provocative question. No, you're not, Nora. And likely it is highly improper time-wise as just happened. But do you think the Minnesota City Council is already putting another Price on her head? Yeah, it's probably. Yeah, probably. You heard from the city council member. She's scared to death. She's like, hey, we're going to fire everybody because I'm afraid that these people are going to come torch my building and murder my family. So everybody's getting the axe today. Yeah, I think that probably they're trying. Look, these are people who are trying to save their city. Okay, they don't know what to do. And they're getting dumped on by the rest of the country. I have a lot of empathy for people in Minneapolis right now. All of them. And even these city council people, right? Even the people who are making these kind of off the wall, bizarre statements and bizarre decisions. And they're under the gun right now. The entire country and the entire government media complex, the entire media apparatus is in their town right now. You have all of these yahoos from CNN and Fox and MSNBC, and everybody is just going to come crashing down into Minneapolis. And they're going to just milk the content festival for the next several weeks. They're going to, oh, this building's burned down. This rioter over here. Hey, John, come talk to me. And they're going to just soak it all up for ratings and blog articles and news pieces. And they're going to make a ton of money off of it. Then what's going to happen? They're going to bail out. It's not their city. It's not their town. It's not their state. They don't care. The CNN people are going to go back to CNN headquarters in Atlanta or back on the East Coast or wherever they come from. They're just parachute in, cause a bunch of division, a bunch of animosity, a bunch of anger. They get everybody wanting to kill each other. They divide everybody in just very clear groups. People pick their side and they start torching their cities. And who has to rebuild that? CNN, MSNBC, Fox News? No, they don't. They just bail out. They go back home and they go to sleep with their wives and their kids, and they wake up the next day and do it again. And the people of Minneapolis have to rebuild their cities. not the news media. So they just come out and they just take a big steaming right in the middle of the city and go home and want somebody else to clean it up. So the city council, wanted to throw money to solve the problem. What else are they supposed to do at this point? Because everybody in the country is saying that every single cop in Minneapolis is a racist, white supremacist, murdering lunatic who just is out to kill black people. So what are they supposed to do? So I got a lot of empathy for them. I mean, they're trying to save their stinking city from the rest of the country laughing at them, having a media field day as things burn down to the ground in Minnesota. Sad. Want to know says, Rob, might have to start defending officers. Looks like a lot of these businesses coming up, they need a defense too. I know, this is another insane thing. It's like, I'm a defense lawyer. I started this channel to not defend the cops, to call the cops out. I have a whole board back here with like 15 to 20 different mugshots on there of the cops that we have covered. And now it's like, the pendulum has swung so far the other way that it's like, even the police deserve the presumption of innocence. Even they deserve due process, right? Like, obviously, like, do I even have to say this? This is a concept that we have to discuss and hammer back down into the consciousness of the American public. Of course they deserve a defense. This is America. So I know that everybody wants to just, throw out Derek Chauvin, throw out Kim Potter, throw out any one of these people. Every person deserves a defense. And when the scales of justice look like they are realigning in order to skewer people, that's when we have to hold the line, and we're going to do it because that's what defense attorneys do. And it's the right thing to do. This is what it's about. These are American ideals that I think are so fundamentally important that when I start to see them just eroding day by day, and I get to see people on Twitter and in the media just salivating over this, oh yeah, look how good this is going to be. It is grotesque because these are lives that we're talking about. These are businesses that are being burnt to the ground. These are people that are going to wake up tomorrow morning and go, what the hell am I going to do to feed my kids? The CNN anchors are going to be back home talking about, yucking it up about what they did to move the narrative forward. And it makes me sick. We have another question from Bacon Seeds. Says there are two types of discharges of a firearms, intentional and negligent. I don't think she is as wrong as Chauvin, but her discharge was negligent. I feel not sure how many reasonable person could see differently. I feel horrible for everyone involved, including her. I think it's a very good explanation there, Bacon Seeds. And I agree with you. I mean, I think it was a negligent thing to do, and she should be charged with a crime, and she deserves a defense. All of those things can be true and in sync. Carolina Flying says when a doctor amputates the wrong leg, it is medical malpractice. When a police officer meant to taser but shoots instead, it is police malpractice. Both is subject to criminal liability. I'm just surprised that doctors have medical malpractice insurance and police force does not have professional malpractice insurance, or do they? So yeah, they do have insurance for sure. But they also have a lot of qualified immunity, meaning they cannot be civilly sued for certain things. That's where that all comes into play. They have a special shield, whereas a lot of the doctors don't, right? They have to have malpractice insurance. The police and the courts have exempted them from liability. So they do have insurance, right? Because they get in a lot of accidents. They cause a lot of damage. They're insured up the wazoo. But it is a little bit different. They are literally protected from certain types of claims. Next up, we got Sharon Quidney says, you cannot stop the weaponization of mob rule. Presumption of innocence is dead on arrival at this point. I'm going to keep fighting for it there, Sharon, even if it means beating a dead horse. Hack Consulting says the best way to stop this crap is to have armed protests. Anyone remember the armed protest in Michigan that the Dems freaked out over? No deaths, just hurt feelings. Then a month later, Minneapolis burned down thanks to unarmed protesters. Get some armed protesters out there and the rioting stops. That comes from Hack Consulting. And yes, right, a well-armed society is a polite society. Everybody's on their best behavior because everybody knows what happens if you don't. We got Senevies 91 says, what is the motivation to police officers to do their jobs when doing arguably one of the most heated time periods between cops and criminals in our history? They are potentially incarcerated for an honest mistake while a suspect was actively resisting and fleeing arrest, further elevating the temperature of the situation. Cops are going to refuse to police. Yeah, you're right about that. Cops are going to refuse to police, and then people are going to start to see what happens, right? It's not going to be good. And I have never been a defund the police person at all. I've got a lot of suggestions about how to improve their ability to interact with society, and I don't think that they should be treating every single civilian traffic stop like they're parachuting into Fallujah in Iraq in 2003. There are things we can do to improve relations between both sides, but I mean, if you're just going to just start charging every look, as I said, Kim Potter should be charged. That was an egregious act of negligence. She has a pretty good defense based on the laws. Now, I don't necessarily agree with those laws, but it's a pretty good defense if you just go through the structure, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, at some point, cops are going to say, enough already. I've had enough of this crap. Like, nobody appreciates it. Everybody dumps on me. This freaking loser, Robert Grueller, on Facebook and YouTube and all over the internet, blast cops every day. Nobody appreciates us. We're taking our ball and we're going home. Damn it. Good luck, everybody. Why wouldn't they do it? It's... Why not? We got Ma Fox says he was charged, not convicted, last I recall. Are we really going to use the police's word for what he did when they screw up like this? I don't know. So are we really going to use the police's word for what he did when they screwed up like this? So a couple points there, Ma. So yeah, number one, yes, you're right. He was not convicted of anything yet. He was just charged with a crime, but you would still incorporate that into your response if you're a police officer, right? You're still going to look at that and say, oh, well, he's got an open case, got an outstanding warrant. He has not shown up for court. Maybe that means this is a highly elevated person. You'd have to be, I would say, not observant as an officer if you just ignored that. Oh, this person has an outstanding warrant for an old criminal charge. I'm going to ignore that as I go and tell him that I'm going to arrest him, right? That would be a boneheaded thing to do. You'd absolutely want to make sure that you had that in your posture as you go and approach the person and say, we're about to arrest you for this open warrant. So I don't think that is just the cop's word for it. I do think that is a documented thing that's on record, and I'm not taking the cop's word for it, right? It's sort of, this is documented stuff that's in history, that's in his criminal record that we can point to. And I would guess that an officer in that situation would also know about it. But yeah, you're right. He also does deserve the presumption of innocence. He hasn't been convicted on that charge. Who knows if he would have been or not. But it's just, my point is, from an officer's response posture, that is a piece of data that they would incorporate into their analysis as they approached him. We got John Delar says, if she pleads guilty, will the judge be more lenient? So probably, if I had to guess on Kim Potter, I'm not sure that this is going to go to trial. I think what's probably going to happen is they're going to give her a plea deal for manslaughter. It'll probably be an open range type of charge or type of penalty where the judge can basically, have some leeway in sentencing, goes in, sentences her. She takes a plea deal, 5 years, 6 years, gets out in, 3, 2, maybe they do something fancy, and she gets out of custody. And that's the end of the deal, right? Because this is a different situation than Chauvin. Chauvin was very, very provocative in the video. What most people saw in that video was murder. And you can go back and watch me when I was analyzing the video in basically real time back in May of 2020. And I had the same response, the same reaction. I saw what I saw, was actively disgusted by it. We're learning a lot more about it now. But that is a case that is so politically volatile that I'm not sure that he could have taken a plea deal, because I'm not sure they would have allowed that to happen. In this case, I think that right now the volume is very high on it, but I think that's probably going to go down in the near future because it really was an accident, I think. And I'm not sure that the public is going to be demanding the same pound of flesh out of Kim Potter that they want out of Derek Chauvin. So I think that her plea deal would make more sense, and maybe she gets more of a lenient deal. We have National Populist says he could have been going to get the gun. Clean shoot, says National Populist. Could have been. We have Senaviz 91 says they fired the city planner almost immediately after he stated that the officer who shot Daunte Wright was entitled to due process. This is all it takes nowadays. The statement should not have been controversial. Totally agree. Not even remotely controversial, right? It's like obvious. I would think that every single American in this country, no matter what side of the aisle on, BLM, anything, you go, hey, we want due process, right? No matter what. We have a process to go through that determines innocence or guilt. We want people to run through that, because what happens, look, the same people who are skewering these cops, it's the same system that skewers people from their communities, okay? When I talk about the presumption of innocence for Derek Chauvin or Kim Potter, do you know why I think it's so important? Because I also have to deal with it with kids like Daunte Wright and other people who happen to be black or Hispanic or white or Asian or whatever. right? I believe that it's important across the board, not for just the cops, not just for the defendants, for everybody. And so when certain people come out and say the cops don't deserve any due process, we saw what Chauvin did. Why do we even need to have a trial? I think Chelsea Handler was talking about that, right? We saw the video evidence. It should be a clean, open and shut case. He's guilty. We saw it. Same thing with Kim Potter. We're seeing all of these allegations out there that she intentionally shot him and that this whole thing is a racial thing. And everybody's just trying to puff this up and convict people on both ends without any due process. You know what happens if we set that standard in place? The next time Daunte Wright goes to court, he also gets screwed. And he doesn't have the wherewithal and the money and resources that the cops do. So if they're arguing for a crap standard for the police, they're going to get the same crap standard in their lives, in their communities. And guess what? It's only a handful of cops who ever get to face this type of situation in our country on a regular basis. A whole lot more black people are going through the justice system than there are Derek Chauvins and Kim Potters going through the justice system. So maybe they should serve themselves well and say, yes, we want to double down on due process, because when there is no due process, their communities get screwed. All of our communities get screwed without due process. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, doesn't matter. But when people start wanting to water down that standard and like preach it from the rooftops, they feel empowered. They feel like they're doing something good for society. Little do they know they are wrecking the justice system. And the media is complicit in it. We have NY Renal MD says, you are right. The founding fathers figured out the best humans could do was to keep others at bay so we could be individually free. Government eventually will morph into a tool to subjugate others. Yeah, it is. Right. It is. And it's slowly going that direction right now. Right. And COVID accelerated the whole thing. COVID gave the government all of these authority, all of these grants, and people are just I kind of like not having to think or do anything. And so we're seeing where this is going. It's bleeding over into all of our systems, our real life systems, our justice systems, our digital online internet communities. The mob is just taking over. And we're seeing what's happening. We have Hack Consulting says, if I point this at a cop, I would get shot. So there are nuances, sure. But in 0.5 seconds, this is a gun for the intents and purposes of a cop doing their job. Yeah, so I'm not sure what model that is, but yeah, that definitely looks and resembles a gun. The other tasers that I was looking at, they sort of have a different handle. They don't look like this really at all. And we went through one of those previously. Chairman of the board said the doctor versus police point does raise an interesting question. Can you be jailed for making a mistake on an operating table resulting in someone's death? Yeah, you can if it's grossly negligent. Yeah, they'll charge you with the same crime. As a cop, you can be in situations at any time where a mistake may cost you your life or someone else's life. Should you be jailed for that mistake? Yeah, if it is a high standard of negligence, right? If it's something that would be so grossly negligent, or in the Minnesota statute, it's culpable negligence. And so you have to be, we're talking about really a standard of care here, and whether a doctor's actions dropped below the standard of care. If they're opening you up and they're going to go and try to do a, quintuple, octuple bypass surgery that's inherently filled with risks, and somebody dies on the operating table, they're not going to charge you with that, right? Because you made a mistake, or you didn't do the surgery as properly as you should have. Like, if it's a marginal mistake, that happens, right? We're human beings. It's a high-risk surgery. You know how that there's a potential risk here. So we're not going to throw somebody in jail for that, for making a good faith mistake in the performance of their duties. Same with cops, right? They get a lot of benefit of the doubt on that. We see they're always investigated, always cleared, no issues. But when you cross that line, when you go from like regular marginal negligence into like gross negligence, like you in an operating table, like you cut off the wrong leg, or you pull out the wrong kidney, or you're supposed to give them a shot of a suppressant or a depressant to knock them out before surgery, and you give them a shot of cyanide and they drop dead. Yeah, that's a big problem, right? That's a gross negligent issue, and you'll be charged with a crime for that. As this cop is doing, sucks, totally awful, right? Like it's terrible. But a kid is dead. And so somebody has to pay for the consequences of that. She was the one who caused the death, so she's got to get charged. We have NY Renal MD says, if I recall, the fleeing felon doctrine, does that still apply in 2021? So, good question. My understanding of the originating fleeing felon doctrine is from common law. And so I think a lot of this now has been codified into different statutes. And then I would say, NY, that really this is now codified into Graham versus Connor, and about We're not using this fleeing felon rule. I think if you look that up, it'll go back to the common law. It's kind of old, antiquated stuff. But some of those concepts have been indoctrinated into our current jurisprudence, and so you'll see remnants of that in modern law. Norovira says, will you ever address what your stand is on dismantling the police? I would say resounding yes. Despite my support for issues that I support that are in line with police, please also support dismantling the IRS. So that one I can absolutely get behind, right? And the CIA and restructuring our government and doing prison reform with wide release of people who are locked up on drug charges. That's a lot. Excuse me, Norovira. That's a lot. That's a lot of. I can't explain all that right now. That's what kind of request is that? But I agree with a lot of it, right? I think that the federal government is way too big, way too big, not even remotely close to anything the founders envisioned. And I actually don't think that it works anymore. If you missed this, last Friday we had fun. We talked about how to start a new country on the back of cryptocurrency. And so Norovira, you may want to take a look at that video because you want to get rid of everything. I think at that point, you just say, we're just going to, America, you just have fun, do your thing. We're just going to go start our own new country in Cloudlandia, in the cryptoverse. So maybe go check out that video, Nora. We've got Bianca Realty says, hey, Rob, you are in recovery. I'm in recovery. You are kind of antisocial. I'm kind of antisocial. If I wasn't in Florida and you weren't dating, maybe we could not go out for a non-drink. Oh, that is such a great comment. I mean, I'm like taken aback. That's so fun. So yeah, maybe all of those things could in fact be true. Congratulations on your sobriety. Congratulations on your anti-sociality. It's a good world to be in. I like it. You know, it's kind of nice and cozy in our little spaces. And you know, maybe sometime our paths will cross. I like Florida. You guys are doing some good things over there. Maybe if Arizona continues trending this way, maybe I pick up, move over there, and we can be antisocial together and not drink together. Thanks for being here, Bianca. That was a very nice message, and thank you for saying that. All right, so those great questions came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com, and I am still a little blushing from the last comment, so let's change gears and finish up the show.